Okay, here we go. John Dannon, crazy talking head. Okay, I picked Bunads that I give this presentation this go around. As with all the other presentations, except the one on World War II, but all the other presentations I've given, I don't know anything about these topics until I start doing the research on them, so it's kind of fascinating. So we're going to learn about Bunads, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start out with a little YouTube video. It's only about 2.5 minutes long, and I'll play around with the computer, get that running hopefully. We'll watch that, then I'll get the slides up, and then Corey's going to flip the slides and we'll get into the meat of the presentation. So let's see if we can make this happen here. This worked at home, so hopefully this is as loud as it goes.
These are like my family's colors. My great grandma, she had my grandfather had like stuff like this. That's so cool. When I walked over and saw my Bunads for the first time, it was amazing. The first thing I noticed was the little detail on it, like the flower patterns and stuff. So I started cheering up because it was around me and my grandpa, and I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, she's gonna be so happy when he sees this. Just one step closer, you know what I mean? One step closer. I'm so excited to wear this. I'm so excited about this one. Yes. Yeah, this here. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. We look really Norwegian. Perspective of my Norwegian heritage. People remember as young people have the
we're just going to roll with this, Corey.
Okay.
Okay, as mentioned, Constitution Day, the 17th of May. And then that says the 17th of May underneath it. This is their version of 4th of July, essentially. I think it was 1814 when Norway separated from Denmark, and Norway and Sweden sort of joined in a quasi-union there back in the early 1800s. That's why they celebrated on the 17th of May. And traditionally, people get up and get dressed up in their traditional outfits. In this case, it's Bunads for the men or for the women, and now the men. Got an interesting history behind these outfits, and that's what I'm going to go over here in the next couple of not days, in the next couple of, I hope not, next couple of slides. Okay, so okay, so what is a bunad? First off, and I knew nothing about this going in, you may find this pretty interesting also, it's an umbrella term, and it talks about traditional clothing that dates from the late 1700s up until today. So this is something that it's a phenomenon that that was sort of re-energized in the 1800s, and I'll go over that in a little bit of detail here. But these outfits don't go back thousands of years or hundreds and hundreds of years. It's very much defined to the late 1700s, 1800s, and into the 20th century. As the second bullet says, the actual, this is what I thought was fascinating. The actual word bunad is a 20th century word. Okay, it's a modern word. And a lot of the bulk of the bunads that you see, and I'll go into this again, are designed in the 20th century. These are modern outfits using throwback design to make them look older. All of them are based on some historical clothing that exists out there, but it's not like, with few exceptions, you can't just look at one and say, hey, that, like the one that Melody has on, that's a couple hundred years old, because in all likelihood it's not. This notion of national romanticism. At the end of the 1800s, there was a movement across Europe where people were, wrestling with the dawning of the Industrial Revolution, seeing all the change that's coming. They kind of look back in history, want to connect to their roots. People are moving out of the countryside into the cities. So there's this romantic look at how they lived in Norway. It actually occurred in a lot of countries across Europe. And it's out of that movement where we get this national romanticism where bunads, people kind of grabbed onto the topic of bunads, these outfits that are traditional dress in the countryside, dancing, music, very much interested in that. Obviously these garments are a visible example of that period. Okay, next slide. So this I thought was kind of fascinating here. You may have heard of the Bunad. Who's heard of the Bunad police? Anybody heard of the Bunad police? Yeah.
Bunad what?
Police. Bunad police. All right. It's not a real police force, but there is an organization that authenticates the different Bunad designs. And it's an active part of wearing a bunad is whether or not yours is authenticated, is it a new one, what is the lineage, where did it come from, etc. That's a big part of wearing one of these outfits, is you got to know the history behind it if you're going to sport one of these things. Turns out, category 1, there's less than 20 bunads that they can trace back into history, back into the late 1700s, where they can say, without a doubt, they see that particular outfit. It was in paintings, Maybe there's some historical examples still left. And those are the ones that make it into the top 20, category 1. The nearly unbroken tradition, there's only about 10 of them there. Okay? Maybe recreated based on historical garments. Then you get to this category 3. This is about 70. These are the officially recognized. You're going to get down to this number of 220 at the bottom. So we've got about 70 outfits, 70 Bunads here that are essentially pulled together from different historical references, but a little less detailed than the first 2 categories. Then you got category 4. It's the random or incomplete sets. Okay, but they've been officially recognized. And there's, you go on various sites out there, you can find these 100 garments. But essentially, they're not modern, but they are historically recreated. Maybe they didn't have the whole outfit. And then this group here, this is the group that all the modern Bunads aspire to be in. The police, the authorities, the group that monitors whether or not this is traditionally accurate, every year they look to bring in people. Tons of people are making Bunads representative of their region, maybe little artifacts that have been passed down in their family. They come up with a Bunad design, they submit it to this group, and then they adjudicate whether or not it gets added to the list. Right now, we're looking at about 220 Bunads that are officially recognized. Next slide.
Excuse me, I got a question.
Yes.
What do you think Jim Cantore of the Weather Channel will think of this category system?
I think he would like that. He would like that. Because it comes with a map. So, as the map.
You'd be blown away.
Yeah, blown away. Okay. Here are some design elements. These things typically made by hand. Okay. This elaborate embroidery, and we've got some super examples wandering the room, and I'm going to set up here that we invite you to come up and take a look at. Elaborate embroidery, fabrics, colors, patterns. The outfit, the way it comes together, what you end up wearing, if you follow, the Bunad rules. If somebody was to see you wearing this at an event, they could sort of tell a little bit about you. They could tell that you were married or if you were single. They could tell for women or for men based on the design of the clothing that they're wearing. They could tell what region that you're from. They could tell how historically rich the outfit that you're wearing is, the Bunad you're wearing, how far back it goes in time. This is kind of interesting when you start to dig into this. If you say, hey, I'm from Vestfold or I'm from Bergen, you think there's a Bunad for that particular location. When you actually dig into it, you'll find because there's 220 of these things officially recognized, there's actually about 450 that are out there trying to get into the system. A particular location can have several different Bunads that are determined to be representative of that area. If you've got one that's in category 1, then you've got one of the oldest ones. But it doesn't mean that that's the only Bunad that would be associated with that county, let's say. There can be more modern ones that have been designed, tapped into some historical story that goes along with it, and then you end up with more than one Bunad for a particular area. This is what makes up a Bunad. A shirt, okay? A shift. How many people know what that is? I know no men in here can read it. I'm glad to look that up. A shift is
a long shirt. A linen undergarment that was worn like everywhere.
Okay.
The drawstring at the neck and below the elbow.
Okay. See, I told you, none of the guys are going to step forward to tell us what a shift
First
is.
garment you put on.
There you go. That's another one. Kind of wear it underneath the makes one of the layered components of this thing. All right, what else do we have here? Jewelry is key, and we have some jewelry. You'll see that. That's what makes these things kind of pricey, along with the hand embroidery. And the outfit may not be complete without a cape, or jackets for the guys, shawls, hats. These things can get pretty over the top, to the extreme sometimes. Okay, next slide. This I thought was fascinating. Bunads for men are a 20th century development. Okay, so these really old Bunads, those are mainly women's clothing. This notion of men's Bunads is a 20th century creation. So when you see these really old-fashioned looking outfits, it's essentially people using their imagination, maybe looking at old photographs, pulling forward some of the different styles from the 1800s or the 1700s, kind of wrapping it up with the accoutrements of what we now believe are elements of Bunad clothing, and that's what makes the men's outfit. Most of the stuff that I looked at, there's tons of versions of women's Bunads, and just a couple different kinds. Like it would not be unusual if you looked at a region and there's like 5 different Bunad outfits for women, but maybe only 1 or 2 for the men, because again, it's a 20th century activity. Though somewhere in here, apparently men's Bunads are taking off. As of about the 2000 time frame, they're quite popular. So maybe next year, Corey will show up in his.
Yeah.
I've got it on right now.
Controversy. Everything has a little controversy. There's an infusion of Chinese Bunads that are out there that you can get on the internet. Okay. Part of the tradition here, because this is very much a traditional piece of clothing, is along with that tradition comes with the notion of hand making this, of a family piecing together embroidery and cloth and making these outfits and making them personal to their families, which is part of the tradition. So when you've got, the Uyghurs making Bunads in China, it kind of undercuts the notion of this is traditional clothing. But if you drop down to this bullet here, these aren't the Chinese Bunads. These are the ones that are made locally in Norway. Very, very expensive. That's the only reason my wife doesn't have one. This is the price. And I don't know that she'd know if I got it for her, but anyway.
Better have it on for the picnic.
She'll be wearing the Bunad bikini. All right, so we've got the controversy with the machine-made Bunads out of sector there. We've got this notion that it's got to be part of the family tradition. Folks coming together and making these. Here's that 450 number. I told you before there's 220 Bunads that are officially recognized, but total there's about 450 that are out there floating around. These are in Norway. Apparently, it's a big deal. Communities will come together. They'll piece together something that they think is representative for their region or their town. Put one of these Bunads, sew one of these Bunads up, and then they submit it to the historical group that monitors this to see if they can get it adopted. So the list of Bunads will grow. Okay, in the 21st century, there will be new Bunads, and that's what that number sort of represents. Because I don't even think there's barely 450 towns in Norway. So there's quite a few of these things out there. The cost with accessories and jewelry, like I said, between $4,000 and $5,000. So I got a lot of the pictures that you're going to see off of a high-end website for Bunads, where you go and you click on the name of the place that you're from, and it opens up all these pictures. And And underneath that is the price on these things. And that's without the jewelry. These things
Wow.
are expensive. And again, those are store-bought, but they're made in special, like seamstress places in Norway. You know, places that validate they're handmade and made in traditional ways. So, and this was mentioned even this evening that Bunads are generally given as confirmation gifts. That's the first time that somebody would usually receive their Bunad is when they go for confirmation, which makes it for another interesting story that when they make these things by hand, they tend to tuck in a lot of extra fabric in the seams at the waist or down at the bottom of the dresses, so that these things, as these young women grow older, or the guys that get more rotund like myself, they let out the seams, and these things they keep wearing the same outfit. Because at 4 to 5K, this is not something you're going to grow out of and buy a new one very often. Okay. Excellent. All right. That's about all.